Hi, I'm Kurt Von Diest for RGG EDU, and we are retouching an asparagus salad. So looking at my notes from Rob, he mentions that the salad feels a little low in the bowl, so we'd like to ramp up the size of the salad so it fits a little more fully inside of the bowl, besides just a little cleanup and a little color work. So that's what we're going to do. So looking at it here in Capture 1, it feels really neutral. The color balance feels right. So I'm just going to go ahead and process this out, which will bring it into Photoshop for us to work on. So I'm going to start with the major request that Rob has for me, which is to enlarge the salad in the bowl. So to start out with, I need to create a piece that is just the salad so that I can enlarge it. So to do that, I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool just to make a broad selection of the salad. I'm not going to worry about making a really specific selection around this. For right now, I'm just making the piece that I'm going to use to composite in. So with my selection around the whole salad plus some extra, I'm going to copy and paste this. So edit, copy, edit, paste, Command C, Command V, same as any application for copy and paste. And so what that does is it gives me just what I selected copied onto a new layer. Now I'm going to reduce the layer opacity of my new layer, my layer 1, that's the piece that I'm going to make larger. I'm going to lower the layer opacity so that I can see it ghosted over my other image, my base layer, my background layer. So with this layer opacity set about halfway down, now I can free transform this to make it larger. So I'm going to go to Edit and Free Transform, Command T. And it's important here to remember to hold down the Shift key and drag from the corners. So free transforming allows us to change the size, but without the Shift key down, I can distort it and warp it and really change it. If I do that, I can just hit Escape to undo, to not accept that transformation, and hit Command T again to get back in. This time I'll hold down the Shift key and drag from the corner, and you see that it enlarges, keeping the same aspect ratio. So I'm not distorting my piece at all. And just kind of playing with it to get the right size. Now I want to keep the bottom of this, where the lip of the bowl is, I want to keep that in line ultimately. So I'm just looking and seeing how big it needs to be to kind of nicely fill this outer bowl shape. I think somewhere in there will be good. We can fine-tune that in a future step. And when I think that's right, I'm just going to hit Return or Enter to accept that transformation. And now I'm going to bring the layer opacity back up to 100%. I can go to my layer opacity there, or I can remember that the keyboard shortcut would just be to hit 0 on my keyboard. So now I have the piece at the right size that I want it, and in roughly the right location. I think it's the right location. And so now I need to just use a layer mask in order to put this only in the area that it needs to be. So I'll use a layer mask to essentially trim off all this excess from the bowl that came with my enlarged salad. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and add a mask. Holding down the Option key makes the mask black. So now it's completely hidden. And I'm going to get my paintbrush tool and paint white to reveal my new salad, my enlarged salad. It's the same salad, it's just bigger. I'm doing this with a brush opacity of 100 because on my very first pass, I just want to be sure that I get the entire salad in there, that I'm not leaving any little bits of the smaller salad intermingled with my larger salad. So for the first pass, I just want to reveal the whole salad with a 100% opacity paintbrush. And then I'm going to go back in and remove where I overpainted a little more carefully and blend it in. So for the next step, I'll zoom in here. And before I start blending, I'm just going to hold down my Option key and click on the mask. And that'll show me my full mask, full size on the screen. And that will allow me to notice any areas where I didn't quite get the whole salad painted on. If there are little spots of black, more likely they're little spots of black like this, I want to be sure that I get all of that to be completely white. And now again, I'll hold down my Option key and click on the mask just to go back to my normal view. Turn this on and off and see the size of the salad is more appropriate, I think. And so now I just want to clean up my mask to get this to fit exactly inside of the lip of the bowl and to blend the tonal differences at the back edge of the bowl. So I'm going to work on the front of the bowl first. So now I've over-painted. I have too much showing, and so now I want to go through and just paint black to cover some of that up, to remove some of this new salad, to bring back the full front edge of the bowl from the background layer. And I try not to do this, try not to get caught up in trying to do this all in one perfect pass. It's kind of a give and take, paint on and paint off, continually refining this. So I'm going and cutting off, painting black on my mask to cut off the areas where it went really out of bounds, and I'm just finding that edge of the bowl. And as I do this, I am revealing some of fine edge of the salad from the background layer, which ultimately I don't want. But this is just a first step. I'm just kind of honing in on where I want this edge to ultimately be. And as I get smaller and into a smaller and smaller area, I zoom in and get a smaller brush. And keeping my finger on the X key, which toggles between my foreground and background color. So that's what allows me to paint on and paint off very easily. So if I'm painting black, I'm painting off. If I'm painting white, I'm painting on. And as you get used to working like this, you stop thinking about it in terms of painting white and black and really just start to think about it as painting on and painting off. Or it's going the right direction or it's going the wrong direction. So following a curved line can be a little tricky to get it just right. And one thing I like to do is to draw short little straight lines. So if I click once with my paintbrush, get a blank layer just to illustrate this a little better. If you click once with your paintbrush and you draw a dot, and then you hold down your Shift key and come to the end of an imaginary line and click again, Photoshop connects the 2 points in a straight line with the brush. So doing that now on my mask, I do it in little short jumps, and this is easier to control than painting in an arced manner with my brush. Because it's hard to paint a very perfect curved line. Working my way around the whole bowl, and whenever I notice little odd bits, I might spend a little bit more time just trying to make sure that I get all of that blended well. Sometimes when there's really defined pieces right on the edge of that out of focus lip of that bowl, I need to shave a little bit extra off. I could also come back and kind of clean that up with a clone stamp. But those are small details there. Another way you might choose to look at this, another aid that Photoshop has to show you how your mask is working, is if you hit the backslash key, the key directly under the delete key on your keyboard, the backslash key, and then it shows your mask laid in, overlaid over your image, and by default it's set to a red overlay. So the parts of the image that are masked off, that are black on your mask, show up as a red overlay. I don't generally choose to edit in this way unless I'm having a hard time distinguishing between the two pieces and seeing clearly what I'm painting off and what I'm painting on. So hitting the backslash key again toggles that off, so then you're operating in a what you see is what you get kind of manner. You're seeing exactly what the effect is without any sort of aid, any navigational masking aid. And since I've been drawing a whole bunch of little straight lines as a fine-tuning, I want to be sure I go back and take off any little corners that might have formed where the two lines come together. And one nice tool in Photoshop to refine a mask like this is the smudge tool. So the smudge tool is not widely used. I love it. And the only place I use the smudge tool is in refining masks. So this smudge tool just helps me, and I like to use this and paint horizontally along a line, or with a line rather than against the line. And it just kind of helps smooth out any little differences or those little bumps that I get from painting with the straight line tool. The smudge tool used to have a keyboard shortcut by default in Photoshop. But since they made the liquify tool so much better, I think that the engineers of Photoshop figured that's replacing the utility of the smudge tool. But I guess they're not thinking of how useful the smudge tool is for refining a mask. So on my computer, I have a keyboard shortcut for the smudge tool because I rely on it and use it all the time for exactly this purpose, refining masks. If you were to smudge tool on your background or directly onto a layer, it's just like finger painting. And that is really ugly, so we don't use it for that. Just use it for working on a mask. Okay. So zooming out here, I can see that I can turn on and off my layer, and I think the front edge of this bowl is blending pretty nicely, but I need to work on the blending of the back edge inside of the bowl. So I have, it gets a little darker as it goes down into the bowl. So where I've enlarged it and I see my new piece of salad, the two tones of the bowl don't match. So here it's just about blending. And to blend, I'm going to use a little bit larger brush, and I want to be sure that my hardness is all the way down at 0. And I'm going to use a low brush opacity. I'm going to start with 20. And so I'm just trying to create a smooth gradient just so that the difference doesn't come in a sharp line or more defined line. I just want it to blend. So I'm really paying attention to how I'm blending this blending these two pieces along the gradient inside the back edge of this bowl. But there's this one piece of asparagus that is kind of breaking out through that line, and it's hard to blend a gradient when you have an obstacle like that. So in cases like this, I go ahead and just worry about the gradient, and then the end of my asparagus gets a little cut off. And now I'm going to go back in there. I'm going to get 100% opacity brush. And I'm just going to bring back in that edge of the asparagus a little more specifically. I'm going to get a harder brush because it's a nice in focus piece. And I could use my smudge tool again just to refine anything there. So the smudge tool has a hard strength, which is, you could think of like opacity on your paintbrush. It just kind of controls how fast that happens. So generally a lower strength is good. So zooming out, turning on and off my piece for my enlarged salad, I think that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to move on to cleaning up the image. So just like we've done on other tutorials, I'm going to do this with a blank layer. And I prefer to use my clone stamp tool. I just need to be sure that with it on a blank layer that I have this set to sample current and below. By default, it'll be current layer, and then it doesn't work because it's ignoring all the pixel layers and just paying attention to your blank layer. Current and below, it works well. And so I have a low opacity on my clone stamp tool, which just slows it down, and that allows me to blend easier. And I don't want to take out all of these reflections. I just want to kind of soften them so that they're not so distracting. But it makes sense that there are some reflections inside of this bowl because it is a glazed bowl. So I don't want this to become completely flat, but a lot of these shapes just kind of catch my eye. So I want to soften them. And so I'm using a low opacity, 20% opacity on my clone stamp tool. And I'm keeping my finger on the option key so that I'm almost every time or every other time I click to clone, I'm choosing a new source point, and that allows me to avoid getting repeating patterns. And as I get into some of the smaller blemishes, I'm going to reduce my brush size so that I'm using a brush that is just slightly larger than the blemishes that I'm trying to clone out. And it's a good idea if you over clone or make a mistake to undo rather than just trying to clone in a different direction. I think the reflection of this cork surface looks kind of dirty in the reflection, so I'm just going to simplify that some so that it's not quite so distracting. But I'm going to leave the broad shape of it because it makes sense that it's reflecting this dark thing. Okay, I think I've cleaned up the most of the little distractions. My image is looking pretty nice overall for that sort of thing. Now these reflections of the silverware in the bowl, those are there, and it makes sense that the silverware is reflected in the bowl. But I find that these specular reflections kind of catch my eye. And the shape of the forks reflecting in the surface of the knife catch my eye. These are just visual shapes that are a little complicated. And if I smooth them out a little bit, if I reduce the complexity here, I think my eye will stay in the salad. So I'm going to make a new layer to work on this. I'm really just going for the highlights to tone down some of the highlights in these reflections. And again, I'm doing this with a really low opacity brush so that it happens slowly and I'm able to blend it. Whenever you're cloning across a gradient, that's when working with the clone stamp tool is the most challenging. And the secret is to just let it happen slowly with a low opacity brush that has a hardness of 0. And practice makes somewhat perfect. And so these little reflections of the fork tines, I'm just going to simplify them a little bit, cloning from the clean gray area of the knife, and I keep coming and resetting my point somewhere back over there. Sometimes with something like this, it's easier to go ahead and take them all the way out, and then I can use a mask to mask off some of this if I want to bring back some of that reflection. Sometimes it's hard to really evenly remove a reflection partway, and it's easier to do it in a smooth manner to remove it all the way. And now if I add a mask and paint black with a really low opacity brush, I can bring back just a hint of those reflections. So turning this on and off, I see that the reflections both in the bowl and on the knife are less distracting. So now let's move on and give this a little bit of contrast. Look at my curves, add a point, bring up the highlights some, add a point towards the bottom, and bring my shadow point down some, add contrast. Start to lose the edge of the glass over here. It's a little brighter in this background. There's some backlighting going on here. So rather than adjust my point overall, which I like what it does in here with that brighter highlight point, I'm just going to mask it off a little bit over here. I'm going to play my burn and dodge action. so that I'm set up for burning and dodging, which we covered in a previous file. And I'm just going to dodge out some of these little dark bits of the salad. That salad was recessed so far down in the bowl that there was a little more shadow in there. And now that it's really high in the bowl, it seems like these would have a bit more light on them. Perhaps I can look at bringing in another curves adjustment just to even further add a little punch beyond what the dodge gives me. Flip that mask to black with Command I and just paint this in little bits inside of the salad. Just little parts of the salad I want to bring a little more. I'm going to start over with that mask. Just Command Delete to fill with the background color. I had my hardness up. I want to bring that back down to 0. And again, just paint in white to reveal that punchier contrast in the salad. With added contrast comes increased saturation. So this also has the effect of making the colors pop a little bit more. Turn off some of my layers and turn them back on so I can see the progress that we're making. I'd like to introduce just a bit of vignette here as well. I can do this with my burn layer since that's already set up. Just burning down, particularly the foreground. Just a little hint in the top corners. Just help bring my eye over some of these obstacles and into the center of my photograph. Hold down my Option key, click on the background so we can see before and after. So we've increased the salad size. I think that looks nice. We've reduced the distractions in the reflections and have added some contrast and a pop of color to the center of our photograph. One last thing, I'm seeing these little vials of liquids have some nice color to it. And my vignette is kind of clouding them up, so I'm going to remove some of that so those retain their nice color. So I think this is looking nice. I'm going to go ahead and save this and move on to our next image.